The next item of business is a statement by the Lord Advocate and Hamza Yousaf, Cabinet Secretary for Justice, on Justice COVID-19. The Lord Advocate and the Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of their statements, so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on the Lord Advocate for up to 5 minutes, please.
Deputy Presiding Officer, in the last 10 days, all of us have had to respond to one overriding imperative: to follow the Government's public health advice, which, as the First Minister has just reminded us, is designed to save lives. That required an immediate response from the justice system. And last Tuesday, the Lord President announced that no new jury trials would commence until further notice. He was right to take that step, which was entirely consistent with the public health advice. Since Thursday, the Crown, in cooperation with the Court, has been taking steps to adjourn most summary trials, trials dealt with by a sheriff or JP without a jury, until June. The only business going through the criminal courts at this time will be essential custody business. Those steps will have a profound impact. They involve putting on hold almost all criminal trials. But they were and are necessary steps. They will help all of us, staff working in the justice system and citizens alike, to comply with the public health imperatives. And as we take these steps to address the urgent public health advice, I am committed to maintaining the rule of law and the fair administration of justice, to respecting the rights of the defence and fulfilling our ECHR obligations. My watchword in the steps which I am taking as head of the system of prosecution in response to the current situation is and will continue to be the safety of the public. Last week, the Chief Constable and I set out our shared commitment to keeping people safe from harm and to dealing effectively with those who do not comply with the law. The police will continue to respond to crime. They will continue to report cases to the Procurator Fiscal. Where individual or public safety justifies that course, accused persons will, in accordance with guidelines which I issued on Friday, continue to be taken into custody, and prosecutors will continue to take action in accordance with the Scottish Prosecution Code. Where there is sufficient evidence and the public interest requires a prosecution, prosecutions will be initiated. We will seek where we can to resolve cases and to progress them with the minimum need for appearance at court. Where a hearing requires to take place and the accused is in custody, the accused will, where possible, attend by video link. Where cases cannot be resolved, and the case is one of the very small number of summary cases where a trial can and should take place, we will keep the number of witnesses who require to attend to the minimum necessary. Where a trial cannot take place, and I have to be frank that will be the great majority of cases which cannot otherwise be resolved, we will have no option but to defer that trial until the public health guidance allows business to resume, even if that means that the accused has to remain in custody meantime if public safety demands it. And we will need, where necessary, to seek extensions of the statutory time limits which apply. Let me turn from the prosecution of crime to add that adjustments are also being made at this time to the system for the investigation of deaths, with a view to relieving pressures on the medical profession. And can I, at this time, thank all those involved in delivering justice across Scotland for their response over the past 10 days, and also in anticipation for their continued support during what will undoubtedly be a challenging period ahead. I would like to express my appreciation of the staff of the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, who have been working enormously hard to do what has been required of them. And I would also like to thank publicly the wider legal profession for its understanding and support in relation to necessary measures which will have a significant effect on many practitioners. The administration of justice is a collective endeavour in which all those involved have an essential part to play, in which mutual respect for our distinctive functions goes along with our shared responsibility to deliver justice to the community which we serve. Never more so than at this extraordinary time will we need that sense of collective endeavour in the service of justice, whilst doing what we all must do collectively to minimise the loss of life. Thank you very much.
I now call on Hamza Yousaf. Around 5 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the word unprecedented has been used many times over the last few weeks. However, frankly, it simply does not do justice to the times that we find ourselves in. Our justice agencies, frontline professionals and other staff deal day in and day out with emergency situations and unexpected events. However, even for them, the challenges raised by the COVID-19 outbreak have never been seen before. I cannot praise enough the work that has been undertaken by these agencies and individual staff in both planning for and responding to the COVID-19 outbreak. I will set out this afternoon the approach that we in government, along with our key justice partners, are adopting broadly under 3 headings: maintaining public confidence and safety, supporting and responding to the health advice, and finally, taking necessary but difficult decisions. In terms of maintaining public confidence and safety, on the first of these themes, we've all heard from the Lord Advocate that he has set out that he and the Chief Constable's priorities has emphasised the continuing commitment to keeping people safe from harm and dealing effectively with those who break the law. Let me reassure the Chamber and the people of Scotland that alongside the essential work of our health professionals, Police Scotland and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and our wider partners will continue their work to protect the public and communities in their homes. Whilst our justice agencies continue to fulfil this essential role, it is important that they, like all of us, follow the health advice to help contain and reduce the spread of the COVID-19 virus. That is not easy. Many of our justice interactions take place in public and require people to come together in particular locations. It is vital that we are not placing at appropriate risk those who work for our justice agencies and therefore undermining the impact of the public health advice. Last week, following agreement between the Lord President and the Lord Advocate, the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service announced a programme of immediate changes to the operation of the criminal courts, some of that which we have just heard from the Lord Advocate. A range of other criminal or civil cases, civil business will proceed administratively through correspondence or by telephone conference, etc. We will use digital means where possible to take forward cases in business. But clearly, as the Lord Advocate has already set out, the measures brought forward by the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service will impact on court business. The Minister for Community Safety is considering the impact of those changes, including to court programmes for solicitors and advocates, and has been working very proactively with the Scottish Legal Aid Board. And can I thank the Scottish Legal Aid Board for thus far showing a great degree of flexibility and the support that they've already announced. The further measures, of course, are proactively being explored. In terms of victims, we know this will be an anxious time for victims. We know that generally, of course, if it approaches potentially a court proceeding, then we know the anxiety that can follow for victims of crime, even more so perhaps in the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So again, the government have been proactive in speaking to a number of organisations that help to deal and support victims, such as Victim Support Scotland, Rape Crisis Scotland, and Scottish Women's Aid as well. So we're working closely with them. In terms of our prison service, presiding officer, we have in place robust contingency plans for dealing with emergency situations. The SPS's national pandemic plan has been implemented and is being overseen by the National Coronavirus Response Group. Local governors in charge are overseeing the delivery of their own plans tailored to the needs of individual establishments, informed by the latest medical advice. As in the community, effective communication is absolutely vital in preventing the further spread of the virus, and the SPS have communicated with every single prisoner, telling them how to avoid infection and advising how the outbreak will impact on their daily routine. Those people in custody who are displaying any of the symptoms of COVID-19 are self-isolating, as, of course, are prison staff. The SPS has established clinically led protocols for testing, and I've been assured that our prisons have secured sufficient access to PPE for staff consistent with those protocols. During this fast-moving situation, the prison service have been considering all necessary steps that need to be taken to reduce the risk of the virus spreading. Effective from today, the Scottish Prison Service will be suspending visits to our prisons. This was a decision not taken lightly with our prison service and was communicated to all staff, prisoners and partners yesterday evening. We recognise that maintaining family contact, perhaps more so now than ever, is crucial during these challenging times. SPS are working on other options as a matter of urgency in which we can support and maintain family relationships, including establishing a dedicated family helpline, and of course we will look at all digital and telecommunication solutions. More difficult operational decisions may lie ahead, and we're working urgently with Scottish Prison Service and other partners to help mitigate, where at all possible, the impact of these changes. I want to express my personal thanks to frontline prison officers, NHS staff and others who work in our prisons for their efforts in what is always a challenging, complex environment, but even more so in the face of the COVID-19 outbreak. In terms of taking difficult decisions, part of what makes the current situation so unsettling and difficult, I think, is the escalating nature and the scale of the challenge. For many people, there is also an extreme sense of uncertainty about how long the disruption to normal life may last. So part of the function of our justice system is to provide clarity and stability for individuals and communities, especially in times of uncertainty. This is especially important at a time when the capacity of our frontline services will themselves be impacted by the measures introduced to prevent the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Members are aware, and we've already discussed in the previous session, that UK Government has published an emergency bill to provide additional powers to protect lives and respond effectively to the COVID-19 outbreak. Following dialogue between the 4 UK administrations and joint advice from the 4 chief medical officers, many of the provisions apply on a UK-wide basis, and the LCM for those provisions, of course, will be considered by members today. This includes powers allowing police in Scotland to support and enforce public health measures, including powers to detain people and put them in appropriate isolation facilities if necessary to protect public health. The bill also gives Scottish ministers the powers to restrict or prohibit events or gatherings where incidents or transmission of coronavirus constitutes a serious and imminent threat to public health. I hope that good citizenship and the continued cooperation of event organisers means that we have little cause to invoke such powers. Crucially, there are sufficient safeguards to ensure that any requirement or restrictions placed on individuals through these powers must be necessary and must be proportionate. The measures will also be time limited. But the UK bill, frankly, is likely to be just the first tranche of measures to enable our key services to change and respond in an effective manner to deal with this outbreak. The bill also gives Scottish ministers the power to make public health regulations to enforce measures announced by the First Minister last night. Breaching the restrictions will be a criminal offence, which could lead potentially to a fine or indeed other enforcement actions. These measures are unprecedented, but we must take this action now to save lives, and we do not do so lightly. We do not want to use these powers, and we're working on the basis that most people will act and comply as we've set out. Over recent days, we have been engaging closely with key justice organisations and other partners to consider what further legislative measures may be required, specific to devolved services here in Scotland, and further information about these measures will be shared in the future. Measures will be limited to ones that we in government and our partners consider absolutely necessary in order to respond effectively and promptly to the particular exceptional circumstances of this outbreak. Our clear intention is that those measures will be subject to appropriate scrutiny by this Parliament and will be time limited. But let me be clear, all measures that are necessary to keep our citizens safe, be they in our prisons or indeed out with our prisons, will have to be considered. Underpinning our approach will be our continuing absolute commitment to the rule of law and protecting individuals and our communities from harm. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I'm confident that members will join me in expressing our continued thanks for those who work within our justice system at this significant time of unprecedented challenge. We'll continue to work with them with the support and capability they need to protect lives, but crucially, to maintain confidence in Scotland's justice system.
The Lord Advocate and the Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in their statement. You'll have noticed that the statements have gone over time, and I cannot allow any more than 20 minutes for questions, so it's oversubscribed and very tight, so brevity would be required for fairness' sake. And first of all, call Liam Kerr, if you could indicate to whom you wish to address your question particularly.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank both the Cabinet Secretary and Lord Advocates for advance sight of their statement, and in particular the approach that they and their justice teams are taking. I think this will be very reassuring. Time is unexpectedly restricted, so I'll get into 3 issues, 2 for the Cabinet Secretary and 1 for the Lord Advocate for me. With regard to prisons, This is undoubtedly a difficult environment to stop the spread, and I understand protocols are in place. But first of all, what contingency has the Cabinet Secretary considered in the event of a critical number of staff being absent, and what more is being and can be done to limit the spread, especially in prisons such as Barlinnie, where you've got doubled up cells? Lord Advocate, secondly, you said you'd seek extension of statutory time limits in relation to remand. I understand the intention, but wonder for how long he can do that and whether there are any other alternatives being explored that he's prepared to tell us about. And finally, with regard to our police, Cabinet Secretary, is the Cabinet Secretary fully satisfied that our brave officers charged with enforcing the lockdown have enough PPE to keep them safe? And can he reassure the public they have enough officers to enforce that lockdown?
Go to the Cabinet Secretary and then to the Lord Advocate.
Just again, can I thank Liam Kerr also for his approach, and we've had very constructive dialogue over the last few weeks, and I appreciate his approach. In terms of prisons, he's absolutely right, a very difficult environment indeed. Of course, SPS is following the public health advice to the T, but I will be very honest and very frank with Liam Kerr. Every option must be explored. If, for example, our staff absences at SPS continue because of the public health advice, therefore we will have to look at every single measure. And let me be clear, just as the UK government has looked at releasing prisoners or increasing the numbers on HDC, so too in Scotland we cannot rule out releasing prisoners if that is to the best interest in keeping our establishments safe and those who work in those establishments. So that is something that will be actively explored. In terms of his question in relation to the police, I was talking this morning to the Chief Constable. I understand there's an order of PPE coming in, which will give hopefully further reassurance for those officers. In terms of numbers, he will note the appeal that's gone out for special constables and to their employers to free up their time to work further with the police. And finally, I would say that there's around 350 odd recruits starting at Tullyallen with Police Scotland as we speak.
Lord Advocate.
Yes, I'm grateful for the question. Within the current framework, the legal framework within which we operate, we cannot bring cases to trial in the solemn courts or indeed in most summary cases. It will therefore be necessary for us to extend time limits, and one of the tensions, one of the challenges that we face will be the need for individuals to be detained on remand where public safety requires it. The guidelines I've issued to the police are focusing decisions on custody firmly on the question of public safety, so that where public safety demands it, individuals will be taken into custody, but people are not taken into custody unnecessarily. Beyond that, a range of measures are being considered with government, but it perhaps wouldn't be for me to outline what those are at this stage.
James Kelly.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I thank the Lord Advocate and the Cabinet Secretary for their statements. Due to the COVID-19 outbreak, we do live in unprecedented times, and it's important that we work together. However, Parliament also exists as an essential platform for MSPs to bring issues to government ministers and the Lord Advocate to ensure the response is as comprehensive as possible. I have two questions for the Cabinet Secretary for Justice. First of all, in terms of prisons, this is a sensitive area. There have been reports of an incident yesterday at Addiewell Prison, and I think that underlines the importance that staff must have appropriate PPE equipment. It's been drawn to my attention that staff in the prison escort service don't have that appropriate equipment at this minute in time. So can I ask, when is that going to be supplied, and will it be up-to-date equipment? Secondly, in relation to the police service, what action is going to be taken to ensure that the governance arrangements are in place to ensure that local police decisions fit in with the priorities of the local community in relation to the ongoing outbreak?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I thank James Kelly for his question? I take absolutely what he says. Of course, this is a chance for us to inform, but also to be scrutinised, and I do welcome that, the approach that James Kelly takes. In terms of prisons, he's right, there was an incident at Addiewell. I was briefed throughout the day regularly from the SPS in relation to that incident. It was resolved last night. What I would say is that it's just an example of the difficult and challenging circumstances we find in prisons right across the country at any time, let alone, of course, these are the most challenging of times. And there was some anxiety. I'm not saying it's related to the Addywell incident, but a lot of anxiety, I think, from people that visits were continuing, and therefore the decision to suspend visits, I think, absolutely the correct one, in line with public health guidance. But equally, if all family contact was cut without no family contact by means of digital or telecommunications, then I think we would have an adverse reaction too. So SPS is working urgently and proactively to see how we can continue that family contact. In relation to the contract we have with the GOME in terms of policing escorts, I will look into that issue. It hasn't been raised with me as a concern. I'll speak to James Kelly offline if he has any further information, but I will proactively, after this session, speak with our officials in relation to GOME contract and PPE, because they do an important job. In terms of local policing, I will leave that as an operational matter to the Chief Constable, but I know that he greatly values the local relationship that divisional commanders have with the local authorities, and of course that he's absolutely right, James Kelly, to allude to the fact that the response may be different in different geographies and different parts of the country in responding to this outbreak. But the Chief Constable is absolutely clear that his commitment is to ensure that people are kept safe in Scotland throughout this pandemic. That may be dealing directly with issues related to the pandemic, but equally it might be issues that are not connected to that, but are substantially important to local communities.
We'll move now to the open questions. May I ask those who wish to ask one to press the request to speak buttons and remind everyone about the need for brevity, please, and to direct your question appropriately. John Finney, followed by Willie Rennie.
Thank you, President Officer. I can also thank the Lord Advocate and the Cabinet Secretary. Cabinet Secretary, for not the first time, I want to commend the important role that cleaning staff play in our public services, no more importantly as we face this particular situation just now. Trade unions have claimed that a number of private companies, including Serco and Sodexo, are refusing to pay cleaners who are isolating or who cannot attend due to childcare. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm what discussions he's had with those companies regarding staff at the private prisons? And will he confirm that all staff at those sites and across the prison service will be paid? And finally, that all staff will be tested, please?
Not particularly relevant to the statement that was made, I didn't think. But if you wish to respond, Cabinet Secretary.
I'll just give a very, very, very quick response, because I think it probably relates to our private prisons in particular. I haven't been made aware of that situation in relation to cleaners. If that is the case, I would be extremely disappointed, because that is not, of course, the message that has gone forward from this government, nor indeed, I should say, from the UK government either. So I would be deeply disappointed if that is the case. So I'll follow the issue up as John Finney has raised, particularly in relation to our private prisons.
Willie Rennie.
Concerned about a potential rise in domestic abuse as we endure this period of lockdown. How do we ensure that there is support for potential victims? How do we ensure we've got enough escape routes, especially if they're confined to the home? And how do we ensure that we're not just leaving them to their own devices?
Can I give some assurances? I look to the Lord Advocate just to make sure I'm being kept right in this, but when it comes to, for example, cases where business will be deprioritised, one area that certainly will not be deprioritised is domestic abuse. And we've said that very clearly. The Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service have said that very clearly as well. So hopefully that gives a good reassurance in around those that are fearful, are living in an abusive relationship and perhaps waiting for that case to come to the court. We've been very aware of this situation. It's been raised directly with me by organisations like Victim Support Scotland and Scottish Women's Aid. Police Scotland are also aware of the situation and therefore are liaising with those organisations, plus their local intelligence that they have. But of course, the new Domestic Abuse Act that came into force only came into force once the vast majority of those officers had enhanced domestic abuse training. So to give Willie Rennie as much assurance as I can, it's absolutely an issue that we're aware of in government, police are aware of, and it will be a case, it will be a matter which the courts continue to prioritise.
George Adam, followed by Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What is the Cabinet Secretary's response to Police Scotland's call to employers to consider paid leave to members of staff who volunteer as special constables to allow them to support the national effort to tackle coronavirus?
Hamza Yousaf.
In short, it would be to support that call. We know the impact that coronavirus, COVID-19 is having on staff right across the justice sector and, of course, wider. Police Scotland are not immune to that, so they are, of course, they have put out a call, I should say, to special constables and to the employers of special constables to allow them to give them paid leave so they can do more work as special constables, which will help to bolster our police force. So I would add my weight to that call to employers to be sensitive to that call, to heed that call, and hopefully help us all in this national endeavour to combat this virus.
Maurice Corrie, followed by Rhoda Mackay.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I address this question to the Lord Advocate, please? Will prosecutors require to attend court for a few trials proceedings? And if so, what steps are being taken to protect them?
Lord Advocate.
Yes, I'm grateful for that question. I should say that the starting point is that the prosecution service has, in the past week, taken steps to maximise working remotely and working from home. In the management of the court business, where cases can be progressed without an appearance by anyone at court, they will be progressed in that way, and it's hoped that judicial case management and proactive engagement between the Crown and the Defence will maximise the potential for progressing cases in that way. When it comes to the very small number of trials which will continue, there will be no option but for those required to attend to be at court. It'll be a matter for local arrangements to seek to ensure social distancing so far as possible. So I suppose the starting point are the steps that have been taken to minimise the need for people to attend court generally at this time, and if, insofar as court business has to take place, local arrangements for respecting the social distancing requirements.
Rhoda Mackay, followed by Daniel Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My question is to the Cabinet Secretary. In relation to maintaining family contact, can the Cabinet Secretary give an approximate timescale of when new measures such as a helpline, etc., will be available?
Hamza Yousaf.
Well, all I can say to Rona Mackay at this stage is the decision was taken last night, and I would look to make sure we have solutions in place in days as opposed to weeks. And already some of these measures can be deployed. We're actively looking at a range of measures. The helpline is one of them. We know that technology exists elsewhere in relation to mobile phones that have restricted call lists, and other such measures, of course, as well as video conferencing and so on and so forth. So a whole suite of packages is being looked at. Of course, we look at that to retain family contact. Equally, we have to understand, of course, the environment we're working in, and therefore, of course, appropriate risk assessment also has to be in place. But I would give Rona Mackay in the Chamber an absolute assurance this has been done as a matter of absolute urgency.
Daniel Johnson, followed by Sandra White.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary for Justice acknowledged the fact that the new restrictions and enforcement of them will place real pressures on both the capacity and availability of both police officers and police staff. But just this afternoon, the Unison Police Scotland Staff Branch stated that key staff roles have yet to be identified by the police. I was just wondering if the Cabinet Secretary could say what communication he has had with the Chief Constable about this, but also generally what steps are being taken to maximise the availability of both police officers and staff at this time.
Hamza Yousaf.
The important point raised by Daniel Johnson and around police staff. To give a direct answer to this question, I raised this very issue with the Chief Constable yesterday afternoon, and mentioned to him that I'd also heard communication, not directly from the union, which I do tend to meet on a regular occasion, but from a number of police staff that had been in touch directly. He was surprised that was coming in, and he absolutely gave me a reassurance that he would turn his urgent attention to that issue, to the staffing issue. And his communication to me was very clear that they are following the government's guidelines. Therefore, anybody who is able to work at home should absolutely be working at home. While we recognise for some staff that simply will not be possible, he is of the opinion, of course, that where that is possible, he expects that to happen. So I did raise it with the Chief Constable yesterday afternoon, and I'm sure he is working hard on that matter.
Sandra White, followed by Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's a kind of follow-up to the previous question. Some officers have contacted me and other MSPs, and they're worried that vulnerable members in the police force are being encouraged to continue to work, even if they are symptom-free. Can the Cabinet Secretary clarify what advice senior staff should be giving to vulnerable and at-risk members?
Hamza Yousaf.
Well, the advice from government obviously has been very clear in relation to who should be working, but also who should be working at home, particularly the advice from the government, which can be found, of course, on our website, NHS Inform, but also, of course, in a myriad of other places around those who are high risk or deemed to be high risk, and therefore, of course, the precautions should be taken for them. I will, again, on the back of both Daniel Johnson's question and Sandra White's question, I will again ensure this matter is raised with Police Scotland directly.
Anna Sarwar, followed by Willie Coffey.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Justice Secretary if the government will be providing guidance to funeral operators, and particularly community organised funeral operators? For example, Muslim and Jewish burials are done with a ritual of washing of the body before a burial takes place. Will there be guidance on what would happen with COVID-19 patients in those circumstances? And if that is to happen in the community by those community organisations, can the government assist them in acquiring PPE equipment so they can keep themselves safe at this really difficult time?
Hamza Yousaf again. I'm not sure it's entirely relevant to the issues raised in the statement, but if you would like to say a few words.
I'm happy to answer the question, only because although perhaps not into the remit of the Justice Secretary, I do work very closely with my colleagues in Public Health, and Joe Fitzpatrick in particular, but also Anna Sauer will understand this, and if I will, matters relating to the Muslim community, he and I will often get approached regardless of what our official remits are or are not. Therefore, to answer his question direct, guidance has been provided to Glasgow Central Mosque, who do the vast majority of funerals in the west of Scotland, but I've been told it's now been also passed to the Muslim Council of Scotland, who will then disseminate that information right across mosques. In terms of the Jewish community, I'll have to look that up, but I will ensure that advice is sent to all communities in relation to the specific rituals they have in relation to dealing with the deceased. In regards to the PPE, that hasn't been raised with me yet by the likes of Glasgow Central Mosque. They're never shy to be on the phone to me if there is a matter of concern, so I will pick up the phone to them. And of course, if the government can assist through the work that we're doing in relation to PPE, then of course we'll try to be as helpful as we can in that regard.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Willie Coffey, followed by Claire Baker.
Thank you. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary for a reassurance about safety of the staff and prisoners at Bowhouse Prison near Kilmarnock, given the positive confirmation last week of 2 cases of coronavirus amongst the inmates?
Hamza Yousaf.
I'll give an assurance that when it comes to our policies, regardless of whether the prison is one in the public sector or indeed run by a private company, the strict public health guidelines are being followed. The clinical protocols are also being followed. And of course, in relation to the 2 positive cases in the HMP Kilmarnock, they were also the correct protocols, I can confirm, were absolutely followed in that regard. But it does give me cause for concern. We know how infections and viruses can spread rapidly in a prison setting, and therefore, as I intimated in my response to Liam Kerr's question, we will have to explore a range of measures, and of course, some of those we have the powers to enact now. We may have to think about those matters where we do not have powers, and whether we have to return potentially back to this Parliament in that regard.
The last question is Claire Baker.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The cancellation of jury trials will have an impact on those who are the victims of rape and sexual assault, and as already raised, there are serious concerns about the potential for the increase in domestic violence. Can the Government keep a close watch on the situation and provide whatever resources necessary to protect and support women and children, some of whom are in the midst of a very stressful and upsetting court case?
Lord Advocate.
Perhaps I can comment first, and then the Cabinet Secretary may wish to add his own response. I am acutely conscious of the matters that Claire Baker's referred to, specifically in relation to domestic abuse. I can elaborate on what the Cabinet Secretary said a few moments ago, that the rigorous approach to domestic abuse set out in the protocol between the Crown and the police on domestic abuse will continue to apply. And where there is a substantial risk of harm to an individual, the police will continue to take accused into custody. And the guidelines I mentioned earlier enjoin the police to be mindful of the particular issues which arise in the context of domestic abuse. And indeed, if an accused is not taken into custody, the police are enjoined to consider the use of conditions to protect public and individual safety. And of course, courts will continue to make decisions about remanding accused in custody. I think it's perhaps important I do emphasise that the decisions on remand ultimately in this difficult situation will be for courts. But where an accused is not remanded, the Crown will seek appropriate conditions of bail to protect public and individual safety. In relation to jury trials generally, the current legal framework does not allow us to bring a solemn case to trial other than before a jury. And accordingly, at this time, there is no option but to simply defer those trials unless and until the public health guidance allows us safely to recommence the impanelling of juries.
The Cabinet Secretary is desperate to add something quickly, please.
No,
Cabinet
I was
Secretary.
trying to indicate the very opposite. Other than just say to Claire Baker, we'll continue our engagement with those victims' organisations. If there's anything further the government can do in this regard, because we understand domestic abuse could be at a higher prevalence during this outbreak, then we will do that.
That concludes questions on the Justice statement in relation to COVID-19. Apologies to those who would have liked to have taken part. I couldn't reach you. And we'll move on to the next item of business.